Not yet.
There we go.
All right, we are live. Welcome back to another episode of Wellness Unfiltered. I now have a filter in front of my face, so it feels a little bit obnoxious getting used to this, but I figured I need to be a little more professional in terms of my sound quality. So we're taking this seriously, folks. That's the sign. So I am your co-host, Sir John the Legendary, joined by the one, the only, Chris Wilkins the Wonderful, who does a lot of epic things in her life, actually. You just have to kind of take my word for it, though. Actually, what? Because we're going to dive into everything. Like this, the purpose of this broadcast and this show is really to tackle everything that's wrong with sort of health, wellness, fitness, all that kind of stuff. That's just basically screwing us over, and we're doing a lot of things backwards. And so we're going to dive into that today. But for those who might have never met Chris yet, she's a real delight. But what's a little bit of your backstory again?
Oh, wow. Well, pick a category. So today, since we're going to be talking mostly about healthcare, I think my international travel is probably the place to start, right? I am a coach and a nutrition coach and a strength and movement coach. But before I did that, I actually moved abroad to teach languages. And I started out in France and I moved around Europe quite a bit and spent 3 years in the Czech Republic and probably 6 or 7 in France doing cross-cultural training and some interpreting and just languagey things that were really fun.
Yeah.
And so I had an opportunity to interact with lots of different medical systems.
Okay.
and I'm American at base. So it was pretty eye-opening for me, that journey. And I think I'm going to pitch this right back at you because you've been all over the place as well and experienced many different medical systems. So this is kind of what got us to be talking about this today.
Yeah, absolutely. I've traveled. And Shelly, really nice to see you. Shelly is, she makes a really cool product and she works with some professional athletes in the Canadian realm, actually.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, because you work with some professional athletes as well.
I do.
You do. So you get some really cool insights into like high level human performance. But yeah, we've traveled around the world and, a lot of places outside of the US, like when we Canadians want to go to the US, we buy specific travel insurance for like going into the US because it's like, if something happens to you down there, they're going to amputate a leg and sell it in the black market. Or that's,
I've never seen that black market, but I believe it exists. I would believe that.
all these Canadian snowbirds coming back as amputees or something. What happened? Oh yeah, I got
America.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that because my British in-laws, my husband's English, and they finally are able to come over. It's been 2 years because there was the travel ban, right? And in order to get here, they also always buy travel insurance, and they're now over 65, and so they've had to do like this whole special thing. And one of the things that was eliminated from the travel insurance was winter sports, and they were going to have to pay an extra literal arm and a leg, no pun intended. To be able to ski here this year. So it was quite interesting because it was very different than previous experiences.
Yeah. So, like we have an 8-month-old, so we recently had a baby. And for us, so just lay some groundwork here. For us, my wife started having contractions and we go to the hospital and we, I make it sound so easy, like, oh, it's just a breeze. 18 hours later, we have a baby. What we don't have is a bill. Yeah.
I think for the American listeners, that seems like impossible, right? And I didn't actually have my daughter in America either. And I very, very specifically did that on purpose. And I was really lucky I did.
Yeah, I wonder if like there's like a whole medical tourism thing in the reverse direction, because people go down to say Arizona or some of the border cities with Mexico to go across the border to buy prescription medications and things because they're so much less expensive in Mexico, or dental work. But I wonder if we have like medical tourism into Canada where it's like Americans come up here and give birth up here.
Well, I actually don't know that much about the Canadian system versus I know that you have what we would call in America socialized healthcare, right? And I also know that we are the only industrialized nation that does not have it.
Darn like Canadian commies or something like that.
Well, I think the great thing about the relationship between Canada and the US is it's very friendly and jovial, but we definitely like to poke at each other a little bit, but it's never in like a nasty way. It's a bit like the French and the English, they kind of are always ribbing each other, but it's mostly friendly.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing: when I want to like go to the doctor, I just call the office and like make an appointment, and I show up.
Mm.
So we have like each province and territory sort of administers at the provincial level, which for Americans would be like at the state level. They administer their own sort of healthcare system, and so the province I was from on the west coast, called British Columbia, we had to pay a monthly fee of like say $60 a month per person or something like that to be into the BC medical system. In Alberta, it's just covered through general revenues in the provincial treasury. So whenever we pay our income tax or whatever, some of that money is just allocated to AHS or Alberta Health Services. So we
Mm.
don't see, like, obviously it costs money to run a healthcare system, but we don't see that cost because it's literally just goes into general revenue and they fund AHS.
It's from your taxes, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what happens when you change provinces? Like, because you said in one province you had to pay and in the other
Mm-hmm.
one you don't. So what happens? Like, can you keep your, I mean, they're pretty far apart, right? Your provinces. So
Yeah,
it's not like
yeah.
you're going to keep your same
They're
medical
huge.
provider, right? But
Yeah, no. All that happens is like you just register with whatever province you're in, and you get your new healthcare card,
huh.
and then you just kind of carry on like I don't know, nothing. Like there isn't a great like transfer of records and things like that, but it's like, and to be fair, it was hard to find a family doctor here in Alberta.
Why do you think that is? Why, like, you mean a general practitioner, right? Like somebody who's like, I have
Yeah,
a
so my
general
microphone's like
problem.
slowly
It's
drooping.
sliding.
It was like this obnoxious setup that I have here. Yes, to be more professional. Um, yep, it's doing that
There it
thing.
goes. It's tired. It's been holding that isometric contraction forever.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm gonna have to like adjust this at some point in time. But anyways,
It's new. It's okay.
yeah, like look at this whole like arm. I can go whoop whoop like that. Yeah. Uh, there's lots of reasons why I think that is, but I'm gonna just try and slide this a little bit more onto the shelf here. I should have like trialed this a little bit more before doing a live broadcast. You know, like
Mm.
that would
That's
have been
okay
like,
though.
but that's the fun of like doing things live like this. We're like, all right, cool. Uh huh. It's supposed to be able, you know, heavy duty, like it's supposed to be able to handle the way the microphone and all that. But I'm not super confident in the title heavy duty anymore. Seeing it drip.
It's
Anyways,
just heavy.
it's just heavy. It's not doing its duty.
That's doing duty, right?
No. So, um, where were we at before my
I
microphone
was asking
started
about the
dropping?
transfer process between
Oh,
between provinces because, obviously you look at the map and because of the way the map is drawn, you don't get the scale of the Canadian provinces very
right.
well,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't think. But
They're
it's like
huge.
enormous, right? And the population density is very centered and very kind of like
Yeah.
dense pockets and then like nothing, right?
Yeah.
Am I wrong about
So
that?
no, that's
Okay.
pretty much it. There's a ton of empty space up here. Like we have more land than the U.S. Has altogether, and we have a tenth of your population.
Yeah.
And most of them live in like the pointy bit of Ontario. Like that's probably a third of the Canadian population lives in this little pointy bit of land down there. Like we from out west don't like going that way because we're like no, we like our space, our open space. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, the process is relatively simple. You just you register with your local health authority, get your healthcare card. You usually have 90 days from the time you come into the province to register. And before that, there's drop-in clinics. So it's like if I need anything, I just go to a
Mm.
drop-in clinic. Like literally,
Do
just
they in England they don't even have a way to pay. Like we were in England when my daughter was about 9 months old, and she very, very quickly grabbed my husband's gel deodorant and took a big old lick of it, which is new parents, so this is pretty terrifying.
oh
And
yeah, yeah,
we obviously we I was like, oh my God, call poison control and all the American things and give her milk and
yeah.
make her throw up and like the 700 home remedies that I know to avoid going to the doctor.
Right.
Um, and my husband's like, "Well, just call and go to the place down the street." And I was like, "Okay, cool, fine, so let's go." And there was literally not an ability. There was nowhere to put a credit card. Like they
Yeah,
did not have a method for paying.
yeah.
Is that how it
Now,
is in Canada?
yeah, well, there are some services that are a fee. So let's say if I need like a specific medical assessment connected to employment or something like that, sometimes they will connect a fee to that because it's not deemed like medically necessary.
Hmm.
And so they will charge you a fee for that, or if you want some kind of work note to say that you're sick. I think it's just a way of like, trying to reduce unnecessary sick days is, saying like, if you want a sick note, we're going to charge you $20 or something like that.
Yeah.
But by and large, like there's no testing. If the doctor orders blood tests, it's cool. You just go to the lab, they draw your blood, you get results a couple weeks later. There's just, like, so we don't see the cost of it because yeah, there's really no exchange of money that takes place.
And that's really, really different than here. Actually, I was reading recently about, and I've experienced this recently because I've had 2 orthopedic surgeries in the past 2 years. And
Yeah.
literally, there was no way to get an idea of how much it was going to cost before it was done. And so you sort of in America have to go into it like blindly hoping that you don't just receive this insane bill afterwards. And there's no standards for what something is supposed to cost.
Right.
So and I don't know that it's always been this way. Like when I was younger, I don't remember this being quite as like
Bad.
rampant as it is now.
Yeah.
But it's, I think one of the biggest pushbacks that I hear from fellow Americans, and it's changed a lot over the years too. I remember
Right.
coming home, I guess in 2005-ish, right? I came back and told everybody how amazing socialized medicine was, and they wouldn't hear it from me at all. They were
Right.
like,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
just ridiculous. You're just brainwashed. I mean, I literally was told I was brainwashed. I was
Wow.
also told
Okay.
that France shares a border with Spain and that I was wrong about that. And I was like, well, like this
The two
much. Or no, it was
countries touch.
Portugal. Sorry. France shares a
Oh.
border with Portugal. And I was like, no, Spain, maybe a little bit, but like, no. And they were like, they argued with me. It was pre-Google. So we couldn't just like settle it with the phone.
Right.
But it was really eye-opening.
Yeah. There's the resistance to it, right? Because we've all, you think about how, especially on the right side of the American political spectrum, and I don't really, I attempt to be politically transcendent as well, where I don't identify with either side of the political spectrum. I think politically homeless is a little less ostentatious than transcendent or politically
It
transcendent.
sounds a little sad though too. I just like, oh,
Yeah.
you need shelter.
Yeah. Quick, put me under one of the tents over there,
Yeah.
But on the right side of the political spectrum, I think there's a lot of fear mongering, like costs are going to get inflated or things like that. But there's also like no incentive to change the system because there's so much money being made off of sick people in the U.S. And I don't want to sound conspiratorial, but you have a system that profits off of people being sick.
Yeah,
There's
absolutely.
no incentive to promote being healthy, and it's like I don't know. Is it like you go to the hospital and they're like, "Thanks for coming in, thanks for staying," and they're billing insurance companies. Like, how does it work down there?
It's really shrouded in mystery. You can't get a straight answer. And, I've just moved states as well, right? Like very recently. So trying to get a provider from my California state health insurance here in Colorado has been like kind of impossible. It's been, and I'm sure that I'm just not knowledgeable about it because again, I haven't existed in the system the entire time. I spent 10-ish years out of it, just being able to, show up somewhere and get care. Which I think is one of the biggest myths too about socialized medicine is that you have to wait a really long time. Like if you have an issue, you're going to just spend eternity suffering and it won't get taken care of. And I think that's the interesting part about this here is that's actually what's happening in America. People don't go to the doctor until it's critical.
Right. Yeah, because they're they're just scared of like who can afford like $60,000 like to get hit with a bill like that. That's gonna, or having to remortgage your house because you had to have medical treatment, and so people are literally they're not getting the help they need when they need it. And again, there's no incentive to promote. Like I think there's lip service paid, but there's no real incentive for people to strive and try and be healthy.
I think less and less there's lip service paid to it. I think more and more, you're hearing doctors start to speak out against it as well, in that they're not able to order testing that they think is relevant to their clients' cases or their patients' cases. They're having to go through insurance to get permission for testing, which is ludicrous. Why on earth is the insurance company deciding what's best for the patient?
Yeah.
You're starting to hear stories about people. I read an article about a lady who went to the emergency room, never got care, and was charged $700 for the privilege of sitting there. And it became national news. So there's, I think it's this thing. It's not that it's conspiratorial to say something is wrong, but I've said this before and I will absolutely say it again. But I think whenever you start to mix profit and human rights issues like healthcare or education or things like that we consider as part of our societal rights. It's why we pay taxes. It's why we exist in a society in the first place. Is there's some benefit to that. But when we start taking that benefit and only giving it to the some who can afford it, I think you start to muddy the waters. And what you're seeing now is the widening of the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And I mean that in the terms of health insurance.
Right. Yeah. And there's like this pervasive myth, I think, that's like, well, all you got to do is work harder.
That's my favorite argument right now is like, just work harder. And I come from a really not wealthy background. We were on food stamps, and my mom was a single mom, and she worked her butt off. She still works her butt off to this day. And the
Right.
idea that her hard work has somehow given her this magical um, advantage in the world is still part of what I think people are driven by, is if I just work hard enough. And the only reason I feel like I've managed to escape that same trap is because I left the country
Right. Yeah.
and I got
Yeah.
out of a system. I mean, I came out of college with $30,000 in student loans
And that seems like a small amount compared to what people are coming out of college now with, like,
now, right?
now that,
Yeah.
like, it just seems like, oh, I mean, I don't want this to be anti-American, because I mean, I think it's a cool country to have as a neighbor, and like if someone wants to pick a fight with us, we have like a big brother down there that would, stand up for us, kind of thing. But it just seems like the average American citizen is getting like royally screwed. Like, you want to get educated, you're going to be put in. You're basically, good luck trying to buy a house, because first you got to pay off your educational mortgage. You need some kind of help in your medical system. Well, good luck, because you're gonna have to remortgage your house just to get that
Mm.
thing taken care of. And so,
I think, go
do
ahead.
you
Sorry.
do you well, I was going to say, do you see this system changing anytime soon? Because I think, like, the amount of transformation that would need to take place, because it's so monolithic, would be like like, you literally have to blow up the entire system and rebuild it from the ground up. And I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, it has happened in the past. I mean, if you look at the rise and fall of civilizations, pick one, right? You can watch
Fair
the
enough.
arc
Okay.
over and over. And if we talk about this from the anthropology perspective, again, like this is kind of how it goes. And I also talk about the pendulum swing of behavior, and that's on a micro scale as in your personal life, but on a macro scale of society as well, and it's this idea. It's okay to hate America. You don't have to hate all the Americans that are in it, right? You can be unhappy with the systems that you're seeing. You can say, hey, I really don't like the way this country is treating people, without lumping all of the people in that country into that bucket
Right.
too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think
That's
it's
a really
important
important
that,
distinction. Yeah.
yeah, and I think it's really important that because America has been seen as a world power for so long, that people get brave and say, hey, America, actually, that sucks. Stop doing that.
Right.
It's not right that they feel they can continue to get away with whatever they want to. And I think that's what you're starting to see, is a backlash, and not just
Yeah.
in the healthcare area. But if you look up the statistics on the number one reason people file for bankruptcy in America, it's medical debt. It
Yeah.
is the number one reason that people file for bankruptcy. And that's just, in my opinion, fundamentally criminal.
It is. And we don't want to go down the rabbit hole to get us deplatformed in terms, but the, there's a huge, like, what's the word? It's like crony capitalism.
Mhm.
Um, you have, for example, pharmaceutical companies who will get subsidies to develop certain medical treatments. So they're literally, your tax dollars are subsidizing their development of this, and they turn and sell it back into the system at like an exorbitant profiteering, like racketeering profit. They don't
Mhm.
give back that subsidy. So they're literally doubled. They're like, we don't have to pay to develop this because we've got the American taxpayer paying for this. And then on the flip side, we're going to sell it back at a ridiculous ripoff price.
Mhm. And you
Like,
also pay insurance premiums monthly that are the equivalent of a car payment or two. Even with our good health insurance that we have through my husband's job, like we're still paying hundreds of dollars a month to just have coverage. And then it's not free when we go to the doctor. It's not
yeah,
free. I still pay copays. There's still a deductible annually that we have to meet for whatever care we need. So if you're not flush with at least $20,000 a year that you can just devote to whatever medical issues you have, and as you get older, these are more likely and more frequent,
right. Yeah,
then what are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to manage that need, that basic human need? Right? It's like it's a linear progression.
you're kind of screwed.
Yeah. And so that's really where I think there's only so long that a population will tolerate these kinds of things.
Right. So, I mean,
And
you had like Obama try and bring in Obamacare, but and
uh,
like, it still seems to me like even the so-called left side of the political spectrum is still like, they're still actually just crony capitalists.
oh
They put
yeah,
a
they're just lying about it better.
like, they put a different flavor on it, and then
Mm,
they say, like, like, I don't want to invoke the name of your previous president.
don't. It's okay. We all know who he is.
Right. But at least at least you knew that, like, almost like, exactly, because he's such a blowhard, that like there was no filter. Like,
Yeah,
now,
but that was what was so fascinating about that whole thing was like he was literally saying what nobody else said and nobody had a problem with it. And that was terrifying because it's like, okay, yeah, he's saying what he really thinks, but what he really thinks is actually pretty damaging still on the whole when it comes to like how he is completely personally motivated by how much profit he's making. You know, there's still ongoing investigations. He still hasn't released those tax returns. And all this doesn't have anything directly to do with healthcare. I think it has directly to do with why healthcare in America hasn't changed. And you look
right.
at the infrastructure bill they just tried to pass, and it was completely gutted, despite the fact that, you know, it is an existential threat what is happening with global warming at this point. Like it doesn't matter how much money you make if there isn't a planet to have it on, you
But
know,
can,
and I
can you
think it's
can you
crazy.
solve all of this by throwing more money at it?
Probably not, because again, it's like this is the thing is if you keep using the same tool and that tool's not working, you're going to keep getting the same results. It's that definition of insanity, right?
Right. Do the
Is it
same thing over
Einstein
and
that
over.
said that like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result?
I believe it's attributed to him at least. I don't
Hmm.
know if it can be verified that it was him. But so if we, because part of these like these discussions are we want to give people something to sort of maybe tangibly take away from this.
Hmm.
And I think in the immediate short term, it's like we need to come to terms with the fact that there is no system coming to save you. And that really sucks. Like it's a really crappy reality that they're like the medical system isn't set up to save you. Here during the pandemic, we were basically told like if you get sick, don't call us until you can't breathe. Like that
Really,
was the
even in
advice.
Canada?
Yeah, that was the advice that you were given.
Huh.
Because and I understand in one sense they're trying to minimize the number of people who are just so traumatized with fear over the fear porn that was basically being pumped out relentlessly, um, that they would get the slightest tickle in their throat and think they were going to die. Like so, I think that didn't help matters. There's a lot of cognitive distortions that were taking place. Like what turns out to be actually a fairly survivable illness. Not trying to diminish the seriousness of it, but by and large, it's a pretty treatable and survivable illness. But the point of all this being there was nothing being offered to fill in the gap.
Hmm.
Like there was no, hey, there's a couple of really simple things you could do proactively that can't hurt and at least give you a better chance. You know, sleep,
Hmm. Movement.
hydration, movement.
Yeah.
But these ideas are not being promoted. You
Well, that's
know,
what's insane, isn't it? Is that, and it doesn't matter what health system you look at, because we can poke fun at America and our health system all we want. But if
right?
you're in Canada and we've both experienced multiple other medical systems around the world, and this still isn't the approach, we're not functioning on a preventive care
No, it's wait until you're sick.
platform.
Like if you're hypoglycemic and on the road to type 2 diabetes, there's still nothing the medical system can offer you to stop that progression.
Hmm.
Now, I do believe there are some doctors who are like, "Yo, we need to speak up." They don't say "yo," but maybe they do.
They should.
They should. Yo, we need to do
Yo.
something about this because this is not good, right? And so they are starting to try and offer lifestyle intervention advice, like, "Hey, maybe you do want to go to the gym or somehow bring activity into your lifestyle, eat better, you know." But it's not mainstream medical advice to take care of your health proactively.
I think one thing I want to point out too is like just as much as America may not be the top of the list of, example systems to follow, I think as much as the medical system is not an example of a system to follow, I still think it's full of people who really care about
Yeah,
the
yeah,
health and well-being of their patients. And I think they're feeling just as hamstrung and just as frustrated. And if you look at the mass exodus of healthcare workers in the last 6 months post-pandemic,
yep,
we've got a lot of stuff happening in America at the moment. You've got all of these people who are leaving the workforce. You've got healthcare workers who are just like, look, we're done with this.
yeah,
On
yeah.
so many levels, we have
Burned
these
out.
issues. We're burnt out. We're not paid well enough. We're understaffed. People aren't respecting our recommendations. And I think it comes back to this idea that when you're in power, and you see this in leadership a lot, is that you can't scare the people under you. You have to keep this certain amount of information for yourself. And so what it leads to is a very black and white presentation of things. So you kind of touched on this this idea of, the fear machine pumping out like COVID's really dangerous, COVID's really dangerous, everybody hide, right? And it was like, the problem with that was that it was so unnuanced that
Right.
it only left one or two options. And if you disagreed with those one or two options, there wasn't better information available. There was no nuanced information on COVID that they were releasing because they
Mhm.
don't trust that information in the hands of the people that they're supposedly serving. And that's super problematic. Like,
Yeah.
historically, you can look at civilizations where that started to be more and more of the case. That doesn't end well, right?
Right. Yeah, this whole we're going to crack down. I understand in one sense because you could say, well, why do conspiracy theories get traction? Probably
Mhm.
because they really capture our imagination. Because you go, oh my gosh, if that was true, that would be terrifying. Here's an example: the nasal swab being tipped with like nanobots that they're going to burrow into your brain when they like put a swab up your nose. Well, the likelihood of that being true is
Next to zero. I mean, my
next.
cell phone battery doesn't even last all day, so they're hiding some massively impressive battery technology if they're
Yeah.
stuffing nanobots on the end of a Q-tip.
Yeah. But you think about that. If that was a possible scenario, how terrifying that would be. Like we're gonna and so then it grabs the imagination, right?
Mm.
And it really bypasses sort of logical thinking about this.
But the imagination overfunctions in the absence of facts, right? This is, if you look back in human history again, you can see this play out in all the different religions that have come and go. They were an attempt to explain the world around us that we didn't understand, and we didn't have laws that explained gravity. We didn't have laws that explained any of physics or health or even human biology at those times. And we needed an answer because that's our nature. We are curious creatures. We want to know the things. And
Mhm.
so if we don't know the things, our imagination jumps in and says, how about this?
Right.
Hey, there's a man in the moon. Guess what? That's a god, and so's the sun. And those guys, they fight, and now they've figured out how to share the day and the night, and so things are peaceful. But watch out, it could go the other way. And if you look back at all of these ancient myths and legends and all of the incredible folklore that comes out of all of these different places, there's huge commonalities in humanity, and that's what's amazing. Is it doesn't matter what corner of the earth you look in, the stories that we tell have very, very huge similarities. They're about safety, they're about family, they're about
Hmm.
protecting what's yours, and they're about nature and resources. And these are commonalities we all share. And I think when we start building our societies around those kinds of ideas again, we might have less of these problems. Every religion has its big no-nos,
Right.
right?
Well, and with the ideas of conspiracy theories, they proliferate because we at some level know that something is being withheld from us, and
Yeah.
it's usually being withheld from us for corrupt means. And it's really frustrating to try and get an answer. And so this is what actually causes quote unquote misinformation to proliferate and proliferate on various corners of the internet because we're not being like information isn't being shared. And I think part of the reason it's not being shared is because there's a profit motive.
Definitely. There's definitely a profit motive. I'm literally putting that presentation together on deep health for next week. And one of the places I'm starting is like, hey, here's how much the fitness industry generates every year globally. Here's how much. I actually just have the data because I was just putting this up. Let me see if I can find it. It was something to the tune of like $87 billion a year just in fitness. That's not even including health and wellness. That's how
Mm-hmm.
much money is at stake for you to not get better. Because if you get better, you don't need these services anymore, which is actually faulty logic in the first place, because there's
Yeah.
always new people. There's always, there's always athletes, but it's such an inflated market now
But
that,
imagine that we were going to all turn into like high level athletes. I mean, if all of us optimized our health, oh my gosh, think of how like the quality of life.
mm,
The there'd be a whole lot of medical model that we didn't need. And I don't want people to sort of misunderstand that we're entirely trashing the medical system because in one sense we have an immensely advanced medical system, but that's really been developed as a byproduct of like serious need because human health has deteriorated to the point where we need these tools to basically keep people alive. And the thing that I want to like fight for more is how do we get people to actually care enough to take their health in their own hands and say like, look, I can't wait for this system to save me because the amount of change that needs to happen is not going to happen probably in our functional lifetime, I'm thinking.
I mean, sometimes these things go very quickly. sometimes they don't, and it really depends.
Or yeah, you dissolve into civil war or something like that. Like,
Yeah. And these periods of chaos and chaotic change in societies are really common, but there always is a new equilibrium that gets established. It may not be comfortable for anybody living through those periods of incredible change, but it's part of the nature of the beast, I think, is, we all have our ideas and we try some stuff out. I was reading about this libertarian movement where they took over a town. I can't remember if it was in Michigan or somewhere else, but it was a little town. They took it over and they all moved in, and there were no taxes and no rules, and everybody just fended for themselves. And what actually happened was bears.
really,
Bears showed up because nobody was managing the trash, because there's
right?
no city trash collection. So nobody was coming around taking waste away. So trash was piling up, and the bears figured out it was free food.
Yeah, yeah,
And so it sort of was a great experiment, a great social experiment to say, what would happen if we just went 100% in this one direction?
yeah,
Well, that's not great. And what happens if we go 100% in an authoritarian direction? Well, you get Hitler
yeah,
sometimes. That's not great either. Or, you can look back in the history at Alexander the Great or any of the names that have survived thousands of years or hundreds of years of history. They weren't running really fun societies to live in either. It's not it's not like we
no,
can look back at a perfect model and say, why don't we just do that again? We're still working on it.
right.
And that's great. That's great that we're still working on it. That's how we're going to figure it out.
Maybe.
Oh, well, hopefully in
Well,
time, right?
because I think there's, again, it sounds a little conspiratorial to put it this way, but there's like vested interests, vested, because those who have power and those who have significant wealth are not interested in seeing this system change, because any
It
sort of,
benefits them.
well, yeah, any sort of change brought into a system like this is going to take something out of their pockets.
Mm.
They've benefited from like this unfair system for so long, and now they have the sense of entitlement maybe around it. And so any sort of change, like, of course they're going to resist it, and they're going to deploy whatever resources they have, which are pretty vast when you think about some of the most wealthy people in the world. And what, they've benefited from all of this.
Yeah, heavily, right? And I don't want this to sound like it's hopeless, because I think the fact of the matter is that this isn't the first time that this
Yeah.
has happened, right? Where the wealth and the power ends up in the hands of the few. There's still the many, right? They're still out there. And I think one of the tools in this case is education. And if we look at what we can do to take our health into our own hands and to avoid falling victim to the profit-based medical system, is really taking care of your health first and making that more of a priority. And we've talked
Yes.
before, and you and I are collaborating on trying to build some more educational material around how your physiology works and how your metabolism works and how all these things work, so you're armed with better information.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have the fundamental information to make good decisions, then it's really, really hard to find a way out. It's also
Yeah.
hard to collaborate with other people if you're polarized. So
Yeah.
I think the trick is really, let's avoid emotional polarization for the sake of it, and let's really
Yeah.
focus on facts and what we can do and how to move it forward. So it may seem trivial, but if going for a walk today is one way you can take care of your health, then that's
Yeah.
progress. And if you can get somebody
Absolutely.
else to go for a walk with you, then that's double progress, because you're moving that needle, even if it's ever so slightly. Maybe you end up starting a neighborhood walking group just because you're out every day. You
Yeah.
don't know what the impact of your one individual action can be.
Well, and on top of that, like, to sort of build on that, we often look at the magnitude of the problem, and we feel as though the magnitude of the solution must be somewhat equal.
Yeah.
And it totally does not need to be that. It's the old, how do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
Right. And so the thing is, a small action signifies a more significant change, a fundamental shift in your mindset, in your beliefs. And so I think the hardest part is getting started and overcoming the beliefs that you have as to why this is a waste of time and why this isn't worth it. If you can pattern a certain healthy behavior, regardless of how small it is, you can always build on that once it's established.
Yeah. And that's literally what we're doing, I think.
Yeah.
And this is probably why we're so aligned here, is that the power of that incremental, consistent change isn't just on a personal level, right? Like,
Well, let's just do a thought experiment here. Imagine we go back to the year, I don't know, let's just say 2015. Because I don't know, I was talking to someone yesterday about going back 6 years. Now it's funny because I say 6 years ago, I don't even recognize that person that I was because there's been such a dramatic transformation in my life. You go back 6 years and I was still 290 pounds. I was still struggling with my weight, my body image, and all this kind of stuff. But look at like I say, look, as I'm like some I don't know. Anyways, I've come a very long way in 6 years. Put it that way. I am healthier. I feel a lot younger, even though I'm 6 years older. In every aspect. Now imagine if and the way that I managed to do this was not through some dramatic, some crazy diet, some dramatic experience. It was chipping away at it bit by bit, day by day. And it's imagine if we as a society took this approach 5 years from now, the health of like our nations could be entirely transformed. Now this
Mhm.
obviously sounds a little idealistic and probably overly optimistic, but if you just think about it, because we hope that the next 5 years is going to come anyways. And so, yes, the hospitals are going to be like annoyed because there isn't so many patients showing up. But it's like, and yes, I'm an anecdote because there's obviously certain aspects of my personal life experience and story and so on. And maybe we could identify some privileges I've had and so on. But I've also had a pretty hard journey where I was bankrupted and had business failures and mental health struggles and things like that. Like it wasn't exactly like an easy journey. So the idea that what I'm trying to get to here is if we could just imagine, like at a societal or cultural level, we start creating small shifts and we just keep implementing piece by piece, step by step. 5 years from now, we've dramatically transformed the health of our society. And I think like health is the new wealth.
Yeah. I think you've hit on something really important with that, which is that it is still within your control. You are in control of how you spend your money. You are in control of where you go every day and what you do. And you're to some degree even in control of what job you have, as we're seeing now. Because for a long time, especially in America, the narrative was, well, I have to keep this job because it's the only way I'm going to be able to pay the bills. And you're watching people reach a breaking point with even that and saying, actually, even that I am not doing that anymore. And
Right.
it's amazing when you realize just how much control you have over your own personal decisions. And it is what drives the market, right? If you don't buy it, they won't keep making it, And I
Yeah.
think this is the most powerful thing that I can say is that you can't change what those corrupt people are doing at the top, and you can't overpower them with any amount of money you're ever going to generate or crowdsource or Kickstart or whatever
Right.
platform
Right.
you're using. You're never going to be able to do that. But what you can do is just not participate. You can
Yeah.
choose where you spend your money. You can choose which businesses you frequent. You can choose to do things like buy local. You can choose to do things like make sure your food is coming from a local source, unless, of course, you live in an urban environment where that's not possible. But there's
Right. Yeah.
amazing green projects on urban gardening and growing your own food, even in urban areas on rooftops and windowsills and walls that you can actually, there's 1,000 amazing ideas. And this is the beauty of humanity, right? It's like
Right. Yeah.
we're idea factories. Somebody's thought of something. And if they haven't, you could think of it.
Right.
So there's so much power that we have to still affect the next 5 years.
Yeah.
So much power. And it's just a matter of realizing that you can, and you can now. Like, and that sounds, again, now we're pontificating a little bit and sounding awfully
Yeah.
grandiose, but I think people need that because you read the news and you read about climate change and you read about the political systems, and not just here, but there's things going on in Myanmar, and there's
Right.
the
Yeah.
god awful things going on in Afghanistan and 1,000 other places. We're still struggling with these fundamental human, like, agreement issues of like how things should be and who's in control.
Yeah.
And when do we get to Star Trek time where we get to like fly around the universe, like meeting other species and stuff? And because we all now get along and we can manage that as a species,
Yeah. I don't foresee all of us getting along. So call me slightly cynical in that regard, but I think that's okay. I think we don't need hyper polarization like we're seeing right now.
Hmm.
That's obviously not helping us, but it's a healthy disagreement. There is value in that because that's what causes us to go, okay, let's step back to the drawing board essentially, and let's reevaluate this. The problem is this requires critical thinking, and if you keep up, man, I'm like, I don't want to sound conspiratorial, but I'm like, if you keep a population constantly triggered and in a state of fear,
Mm-hmm.
they really can't access their critical thinking because it's being hyper powered or overpowered.
Oh no, you froze. Am I the
but
only one still? There you are.
oh, I've come back. This whole, and you talk about like not participating. Like I kind of made a point of not reading the news anymore
Hmm.
because I was like, there's nothing I can do about it anyways, and all it does is make me annoyed or angry most of the time.
Or
It's not
hopeless,
or
right?
hopeless.
You're seeing a lot of that now too, just like hopelessness of the ability to affect change.
But the cool thing is like we have a platform here. Like
Hmm.
Chris and John, we have this platform here where we're like we're two people that are just neither of us are particularly famous as of yet. I mean, I have grandiose plans of taking over
That's
taking
when
over
we get
the
our capes, right?
yes, we will get our capes. I'm not sure what color mine is going to be. Probably this blue, this shade of blue. I quite like it.
Yeah.
So I will have a blue cape.
I want one with
Um,
a button that I can change the color on it so that it matches my
oh,
mood. Can I have that? Can we do
well,
that?
we could probably do one with what are those little discs that you get that like you rub it one way, and it
Like a
changes
mood
color.
ring?
No, I'm thinking of like a stuffed animal. It's covered like in those little plastic
Oh, the
scales.
sequins.
Sequins. There we go. You can have a sequined cape that
That's
under
perfect.
different light will change colors.
I'm in.
Okay. But this is our plan. Is we talk about this, but why we're talking about this is because we want to actually start to affect change, and we recognize that like obviously we're just two people, but we can probably create some kind of movement, and if even if we just inspire other people to try to go down this path and create their own movement going in some sort of direction, like it doesn't have to. We don't have to unite 300 million people here, but
20.
yeah,
Like 20 would be a lot. I mean, because it's this, and I'm going to use COVID-19 and the spread of COVID, right? If you look at what they were saying about it infects three people, every one person infects three people, and then that one person infects three more, like that's not only how viruses spread, that's how ideas spread too. And
yeah,
so it's like there are some systems in nature that are already within our power to harness. And that's one of them, right? We've been given this gift of language. And you
yeah,
can argue that other species have their own versions of language, but we have the most complex, adaptable way of communicating of anything on this planet. And so it's really important that we use that to our advantage and that we stop using it to cut each other down or to troll people on the internet. Like, come on, we can do better.
yeah.
We can be
So
doing better than that. You can disagree.
yeah.
Disagreeing is really important, but like, let's all try to work on the projects that are really important. And I think
Well,
health is really one of them, because if
yeah,
we're healthy and we're doing things that support our health, we can't help but be doing things that are healthy for the planet as well.
yeah. Well, it's like my foray into this world of ethical omnivorism,
Hmm.
becoming an ethical omnivore. You know, and it's not that I'm doing this perfectly, because the sad part is, it's more expensive to eat this way. It costs more money, and so it's like I can't go full hog into ethical omnivorism as of yet because of just the actual cost of it, because it can mean buying products cost 2 to 3 times as much at this point in time because of the systems that are in place. But that doesn't mean I don't take steps in that direction.
Hmm.
And I think we need to break free from this idea that we have to get it all done all at once, all perfectly. And it's like, well, no, we can just start taking small steps. So I started buying organ meats at the grocery store,
Mm-hmm.
and learning how to prepare them and eat them. And it turns out they're actually pretty edible. And
They used to be a staple part of our diet as well. If you
yeah,
if you look back at how meat was consumed 100 years ago, it looks nothing like it does today. That's You can thank industrialization for that. And there have been some massive benefits to doing it that way, but there are some very huge drawbacks as well. And the idea of like what happens to all of the pieces of that animal that are not the muscle tissue that we tend to like to consume, that's a pretty interesting concept to explore, right? Where does that go, and who's
yeah,
benefiting from that, or is it just thrown away?
yeah.
So there's 1,000 small steps, I think, and that's one of them. Yeah, but there's also just trying to eat more beans or grains or locally sourced things. I have a friend, one of my clients actually slash friend, who lives in Costa Rica, and she found fresh beans at the market the other day, and she was like, her socks were blown off because she's like, I've never seen fresh beans. Like, have you ever seen fresh beans? No, they're always dried or
Right,
canned,
right.
right? But there they were in the farmer's market, grown right there. And she was like, I all of a sudden realized I didn't know what to do with them. So I had to buy them. So she said, and so she did. And then she's now been experimenting with that. So there's tons of opportunity no matter where you live to try to find something local. There's a fantastic girl on TikTok and she talks all about foraging. I should look her name up so I can actually say what it is here live, but she talks about foraging in your native environment, and she doesn't live anywhere special or amazing or interesting or, you know, like exotic to us. She lives, I think, somewhere in, it's either North Carolina or Virginia, and she just goes outside and finds all of these amazing food products that she can just pull off of bushes and trees. And, you know, she always signs off with like, have fun, don't die, because we've lost this really critical knowledge of what plants are healthful, what plants do what jobs and how they can improve our health. We've lost which ones are edible and how to cook them because we all shop the industrialized supermarket model.
Right. This is my argument. This is my argument for animal products, is that, you know, plants can kill you, but you're very unlikely to die unless the meat was like rancid or something like that. You know. So that's not me saying go carnivore, but yeah, but yeah, I think this still boils down to, at this point in time, we still have a degree of personal autonomy. We have a degree of personal choice. There are certain circumstances we are faced with that we can't do anything about, and we have to let go of maybe the things that we can't do anything about and turn our attention to, well, what can we change? Because we still hold enough personal power and autonomy to create quite a significant amount of change in our lives. And I hate to keep referring back to my own anecdotal story because I realize once again that I'm just one person. But I mean, I went through a lot of financial hardship over the last 6 years, as well as, you know, mental health hardship and physical health hardship, and managed to find my way to here.
Yeah. Well, and they often all go together, don't they? And this is why deep health is such an important topic.
Yeah.
Because it's very rare that like, oh, I just have knee pain. Like that's not usually how that goes.
Yeah.
I really want to credit this TikTok person because I love what she is doing. I love watching her videos. There's another girl I follow who cans, right? So she actually goes and buys entire animals and then breaks it down and cans it all.
Oh, like buying, like canning like bone broths and things like that, which is super cool. You know what's crazy to me is that, like, because bone broth is a trendy thing as opposed to one that we just consume, like like buying bones are expensive.
It was hard.
Yeah, the cost per pound. I was like, what? These used to be like cheap dog food.
Right.
Now, you know, now that we've recognized, well, there's the capitalistic thing, and I'm not anti-capitalist. You know, you're not going to find me standing up and advocating for, you know, hardcore socialism down the path of communism, because I don't think that's worked very well either. But there's fundamentally something that has to change about how we do this. But I think if on a broad scale we're going to be able to affect this change, it begins with changing our internal environment. So both you and I, the reason we're now in the place where we're trying to become advocates for change is because we've been on our own journeys of personal growth and development and got to here. And we've got to the place where now we have enough resources to step forward and say we want to help and inspire other people to create change. So it's like this, if you think about the concentric circles we were talking about the other day, where not on this broadcast, but you start with changing yourself, and then there's a little ripple effect that starts to change. You know, as people see that, you start to have a positive impact on those in your circle, and then there's the next circle might be like in your local suburb or something like that. Like there's these different levels as you start to affect change. And so I again want this to be really empowering in a sense. Like, it seems so minuscule to start internally with yourself, but this is, if every one of us does this, this is what creates change on a massive scale, and that's what we want to inspire here.
You know, and that goes for any area, not just your health. You know, you want to work harder on being kind to the environment and using less plastic products. That starts with you, right? And the more people that don't take the plastic straws, the less plastic straws they go through at the restaurant, the more likely you are to see something else take its place, right? So it really is super powerful. And it's, I think the heritage knowledge that we can tap into to do the things that we need to do. I mean, just repair things that you have rather than buying new ones or throwing them out, right? So I think there's 1,000 ways to start. It doesn't have to be some massive shift in what you eat, because I think that's the first place people look, is like, oh, well, my diet's the thing I've got to change. And it's like, or movement. That's my other like top 2 thing people come to us with, I would say, is like, oh, I just need to go to the gym every day and that will solve all of my problems. And it's like, well, For a little while, maybe. It certainly is
Yeah.
going to help some things, but it may not solve all those other issues, right? So, like, think outside the box. Can you transition to a different kind of sponge instead of using a disposable sponge? What can you use instead? Are you able to get a reusable water bottle that might help you stay more hydrated and isn't something that you're going to throw away every time? And these are
Yeah.
really tiny things, but they add up.
Yeah, or just filtering your water with like
Yeah.
you know, I don't know that we'll ever entirely escape the use of plastics because they are so versatile
Mm.
and useful. But we can definitely significantly reduce our consumption of it. Because and you mentioned the word deep health, and I know we're collaborating and working towards a deep health project that we're not going to unveil at this point in time. But we're starting to put pieces together because we're not just trying to generate conversation around this for the sake of talking about it. We really genuinely want to be advocates for some powerful change. So when we look at deep health, I think the things that we're talking about here, yes, your physical health, what you consume, but we're also looking at mental and emotional health. We're looking at social and relational health with the people that you're closest to, and then we can think about environmental health, both like your local environment on a bigger scale.
Mm.
You mentioned sort of the climate issues that we're potentially facing here. And again, we look at the scale of the problem and we think, well, there's no way that we could, as one individual, create an impact on this monumental problem. But it's the wrong approach, right? It's the trying to swallow the elephant whole. And so if we start to see there's every time that we take a small action, it's like, I think James Clear put it like this is James Clear, the author of the book Atomic Habits, for those who don't know. Every action we take is a vote for the person we want to become.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's a really powerful statement. So I gave it a moment of silence because you have so many individual decisions every day, right? Like, and most of them are automated. And so step one is seeing the automated decisions that you're making so that you can decide which ones to keep or which ones to change, and I was thinking while we were discussing this, and I was thinking about this foraging person, and one of the things that really struck me is the biggest differences between living in America and living in other countries was when you wanted to get together with your friends in a different country, 60 to 80% of the time, they would invite you to their home for dinner.
Right. Yeah.
And when I moved back to America, I thought maybe it was just Los Angeles because I lived in LA for a while, but now that I've come here to Colorado as well, I'm seeing the same phenomena. And it's this idea of like, we want to share a meal together, but it's become so complicated because we all have such complex ideas about what is the right food and what isn't the right food and personal dietary preferences, everything, that it's easier to order out or eat out in a restaurant than it is to cook a meal for somebody else.
Yeah.
And I think this is a really great place to start because there's so much to be gained on a deep health front from sharing a meal that you've made with somebody else.
Yeah.
So if
There's
you want something simple to do.
yeah. Well, and to quote one, the company that we both have been significantly influenced by, good old Precision Nutrition. I believe they call this like a meal of meaning.
Mm.
And I think that's the concept they talk about, which is like bringing people together. And it's about more than just food. In one sense, we've almost been unfair to food in that we've put this burden on it that we expect it to meet all of these deeper needs that we have. And this is why we have a proliferation of all these food products that when you eat them, yes, they temporarily change your emotional state. But it's like an empty thing because it's when you connect with other human beings in like a meaningful way. And obviously some of that's been taken away from us through this pandemic. And I I think there's a cost here that's not yet being measured in terms of the effects of social isolation, you know, in terms of and I don't want to get into debate of like various types of contagion control. I don't want to, but there is a real social and human cost to all of the isolation that we've experienced over the last 2 years.
I mean, if you want to get really like sciencey about it, the whole reason viruses have evolved to spread by contact is because that's how humans interact, right? That was effective. It's a super effective way to get around if you're a virus because we are a highly social species. We rely on it for so many aspects of our health.
Yeah,
And not to go off on a tangent of a personal nature, but this is why motherhood is coming out, as this really stressful, horrible thing, is because women are finding themselves doing the load of a village on their own.
yeah,
And it's a really interesting, like you say, we don't quite know what we lost through the pandemic, and I think it's this idea that food is holding a burden for us. I love that. That is super insightful because it is a lot of what we talk about with our clients around emotional eating, isn't it? It's like
Yeah.
you're coping and you're doing a good job by finding a way to cope, but at the same time, like, what are you trying to replace?
Yeah.
You're replacing something, and it's that. A lot of the time it's that connection. It's the sharing a meal. I mean, wars were ended over meals. That's how
Yeah.
they end, right? They end with a feast of the two
Yeah.
places deciding not to kill each other anymore. And so,
Yeah.
it's a hugely powerful social tool.
It
And you
is.
could look at the science and the hormones and everything as well, right? Like,
And we have a comment here from someone, and I appreciate them sharing and interacting here. That's how we treat or value friendship life. That's why the place of my origin, the problem is not an issue, and they call us happy people.
what is
And
that place of origin? I'm
what?
curious.
Yes, now I'm curious what that place of origin is, and thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Um, and I agree. And it's when I changed, or when I go back to this, this concentric circle idea. When I started to reshape my relationship with myself, my relationship with everybody around me began to change in such a positive way. But where the issue was is I had such a disordered relationship with myself, and we could talk about how it was fostered by social media and culture and things like that. I was, in my eyes, I wasn't good enough. And now, because of that, like every relationship every human interaction I have is colored by this sense of peace with who I am, as opposed to feeling like I'm at war with myself. And it's really interesting. And not surprising, it was shared that it's Manila, actually.
Yeah.
And boy, Manila's, I don't know if you've been to Manila, but it's a crazy city. Like it's quite an adventure to go to Manila, actually.
I've not been there, but I have a lot of Filipino friends, and something that they excel at is their family connections.
Oh
And
yeah.
the meal sharing in that culture is
Oh yeah.
phenomenal, and it really shows the bonds between the people are very
Yeah.
tight and very important.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny. So the Philippines has a fast food restaurant over there, and it's called Honeybee. It's spelled HONIBEE. And I remember it because they serve spaghetti as a side option, one of the side options. Or sorry, not Honeybee, Jollibee, Jollibee, JOLIBEE, Jollibee. And they said, I think they named it that because it's quite like the Filipino people. Like, one, they're busy like bees, they're always moving around, but they're also like quite a happy people. And it is really true. Like, they have to be some of the happiest people and most pleasant people to interact with. And uh, it was a really neat experience being over there. Although a city of like 20 million people, you know, that can be a bit assaulting, a bit of an
Yeah,
assault in the
let's get some
sense.
energy.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
okay, great discussion today. I'm patting myself on the back too. I'm like, boy, you really showed
We
up
can pat
today,
each other
John.
on the back. Here, I'll
Yeah,
reach
yeah,
over, I'll pat you.
yeah.
There.
There we go. So some kind of parting thoughts here, just tie it together in a pretty little bow. And for me, I would say your health is still in your hands. There are what we would say there's some forces that are against you, that will make this more difficult, but it is still ultimately in your hands. We're not at the place where you are entirely a helpless victim. And so when you start from this place, and when you realize, of course, the change that starts from the inside is the one that's going to have the ripple effect. And this is how we can actually begin to eat the elephant, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to tie it up, because we started out talking about healthcare systems, and the interesting thing is that it devolves, and I don't mean devolve in a bad way, but it gets broken down into, hey, interpersonal relationships are actually a key component of our health, and how we
Yeah.
interact with our food is a key component of our health, and how we move our bodies in our environment is a key component of our health. And actually, this is where your place of power is, right? And there's a couple of key tools I think that you need for this. And you touched on a couple. Critical thinking is one. How do I assess the information that's coming into me and make sense of it and decide whether or not I want to keep it and if it's valid or not? Um, you know, biological knowledge, physiological knowledge of like how my body actually works, so I can understand what it needs and give it that, and therefore understand what other people need as well. And I think the third thing that's really critical is communication skills. How do I address these
Yeah.
needs that I have within the environment that I function in? How do I make people understand what my needs are, and how do I understand other people's needs? And that way we all can do better at getting what we need, so that we can function more happily. We can be more like people in the Philippines
Yeah.
who are happy and busy, right?
That's a great way to wrap it up. I wish we had a theme song to close this out, but we don't.
We'll work on it. We could sing. I mean,
We
I don't
could.
know that it would get us any more followers. I think it might take us in the opposite direction. I don't know how your singing is. I'm saying that specifically about my own, but
I think mine's quite good, but I'm not sure what we would sing. Like
I'll just clap. I can
yeah.
just clap along and you can sing. How about that?
Yeah, what am I gonna sing? Yeah, I don't have a song on the top of my head. So you know what, we're just gonna say we'll come up with something. We definitely would love suggestions in terms of how we could wrap this up. Because we'll come up with a theme song eventually. But
Yeah.
anyways, thank you for hanging out. I really hope this discussion has been meaningful, and I hope it's thought provoking. We want to see you move forward with your health, and so one step at a time, we can do this.
Hey, and if you're a regular listener, if you've been tuning in regularly over the past few weeks, we haven't been doing this very long, but post your questions in the comments. Give us some ideas for what you'd like to hear us talk about. If there's an issue specifically that you want us to dive into, or you know an expert that you'd love for us to have on and discuss topics with, that would be fantastic.
Absolutely, we want more voices in this discussion, and so we certainly love all of the input we can get. So it is Friday afternoon. Let's go out and enjoy the weekend.
Yeah, thanks for tuning